Tonight on Bridge City News, a shooting at a West Lethbridge home leaves a 35-year-old man dead. Lethbridge police have an update for us. The dangerous offender hearing for Trevor Pritchard continued at a Lethbridge court today. And a plane carrying more than 170 Canadians who were at the epicenter of the coronavirus in China has arrived at CFB Trenton.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Lethbridge has its first homicide of 2020. Police were called out to a shooting at a home on the city's west side around 10:30 last night. When they arrived, they found a 35-year-old man dead inside of a home along University Drive West. Police say this was not a random incident and that the two parties knew each other. Police are still looking for the suspect.
At this time, we have made no arrests at this point, and we have no persons in custody. But I can assure you that, and the public, that our officers are working diligently and has been doing so throughout the night and into this morning to try and identify and bring those persons responsible to justice. We are looking for, a number of people that we believe may have information, and certainly trying to narrow down our investigation to target individuals that were or are responsible. So at this point, again, we have nobody in custody, but certainly we're hoping to work towards that and have a quick arrest to, I guess, give some peace of mind to the citizens here as soon as we can.
The body of the 35-year-old male has been transported to the medical examiner's office in Calgary for an autopsy. Lethbridge police made yet another drug bust. A 37-year-old man was taken into custody and more than $10,000 worth of drugs were confiscated at the Travelodge Hotel on Mayor McGrath Drive South. Kevin Paul Rabot had crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and carfentanil on him with a street value of more than $10,000. Police also seized a can of pepper spray, brass knuckles, and more than $7,000 in cash. Rabot was scheduled to appear in court earlier today. The dangerous offender hearing for Trevor Pritchard continued in Lethbridge today. Pritchard has various sexual assault, luring, and child pornography convictions. BCN's Loris Alexander was at the courthouse and has more.
The Coaldale man, who's 34 years old, was previously convicted in January of 2019.
He previously was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison after pleading guilty in April 2018 to luring and sexually assaulting a 15-year-old girl he met on Facebook.
The dangerous offender hearing for Trevor Pritchard will continue on March 23rd. David Stephan is a man who was found not guilty for failing to provide the necessaries of life in the death of his 19-month-old son Ezekiel. But the Crown has appealed, and he'll be going back to court in June. Stephan says there was a lot of misinformation circulating in how they were treating their son prior to his death.
It's taking everything largely out of context and making us look like a bunch of crazies. And I think the reason that they're largely doing that is to make it look like it's not a peculiar case, but that this is a case of negligence, which it is not, and trying to get the public behind a conviction on this case when there shouldn't be a conviction in this case at all.
Catch the entire interview with David Stephan as he discusses what his family has been through since the death of his son Ezekiel, coming up in the second half of our show. Lethbridge City Councillor Jeff Carlson is bringing forth a motion at Monday's City Council to ban conversion therapy. It is a practice whereby counseling or religious teaching is used to change a person's sexual orientation. Carlson wrote in his motion that the Canadian Psychological Association opposes the practice, stating it can result in negative outcomes such as distress, anxiety, depression, and have a negative self-image. Devin Hargraves ran as the Lethbridge Liberal candidate in the last federal election. Hargraves has been trying to ban conversion therapy for quite some time. He took his crusade to the legislature in Edmonton, but wants to see it banned nationally.
It started several years ago, Tabor Pride. My good friend Jen Takahashi with LPIRG, the Lethbridge Public Interest Research Group, was starting a petition provincially to ban it here in Alberta. So I thought that was a great thing. I came on board with her, and throughout meetings, things like that, it's why are we limiting this to Alberta? Let's take this federal. We can ban it in Alberta. It's being banned in a few other provinces. Let's ban it all at once. And that's where that started. We wrote a e-petition 1833 to put conversion therapy in the criminal code. That was signed by 18,200 Canadians from across Canada.
Conversion therapy has already been banned in Edmonton, St. Albert, and Vancouver. And Calgary City Council is also looking at banning the practice. Several churches will host a one-of-a-kind prom night event for people with special needs tonight. Victory Church in Lethbridge is taking part in the celebration, which is part of the Tim Tebow Foundation's Night to Shine.
This is our third event that we've had here in this location. We've actually started our fourth location this year in Taber. We're really excited to be able to host Night to Shine, sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation, of course, but hosted by My Victory Church. We absolutely love it. We're really excited. We're expecting about 160 or so people here with special needs this evening, plus their guests, so about 260 in total, and we're just really excited.
The global event has grown quite a bit since it was launched in 2015. This year, 115,000 teens and adults with special needs will be honored at events around the world. Some good news from Alberta Health Services. The agency says the whooping cough outbreak from October is officially over. There were 34 confirmed cases with no hospitalizations or deaths. Of the cases, 16 people were not immunized. Those infected were from many areas across southwestern Alberta, including Lethbridge, Raymond, Picture Butte, Nobleford, and Bow Island. In total, there were 63 confirmed cases of pertussis in AHS's South Zone during 2019 and 45 confirmed cases in 2018. An airplane carrying Canadians from the epicenter of the coronavirus, Wuhan, China, landed in Trenton, Ontario earlier today. The flight was chartered by the Canadian government and brought back 176 people. The evacuees will undergo 2 weeks of quarantine and monitoring to check whether they have contracted the virus. Worldwide, there are now over 31,500 confirmed cases of the coronavirus, with 638 deaths, most of those in China. Ottawa's chartered a second flight to bring Canadians home from Wuhan, China next week. Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne says the second flight is scheduled to leave Wuhan on Monday.
We'll be leaving, departing Yuan on the 10th of February and arriving in Trenton on the 11th, because as you will recall, we need to provide the manifest to the Chinese authorities within 24 hours. So we really want to make sure that at the end, because that would be the third plane, as I called it, or the second Canadian plane, that all of those who may not have been able to go to the airport for whatever reason, whether they're personal, whether because traffic or other logistics, that we give them enough time to say this is the second Canadian plane, so you have ample time to make sure you do all the preparation to get there. So I think it's a good thing, because then we will make sure that everyone who wants to depart will have, let's say, a third chance to come back to Canada. Let's remember, there'll be Canadian left in Wuhan that have decided to stay. So we will continue to provide the services to those Canadians who are there.
The flu-like virus that exploded in China has researchers around the world scrambling to find a vaccine. But as we hear in this next report, there is no guarantee it will arrive on time.
Just days after Chinese scientists shared the virus's genetic code, researchers at the National Institutes of Health were engineering a key vaccine ingredient. Their target is a spike-like protein on the virus's surface. NIH is working with biotech company Moderna to manufacture the vaccine.
It's a very rapid way of discovering new applications because it's all based on digital technology.
Injecting a piece of the virus's genetic code in a vaccine instructs cells to make the target protein. That puts the immune system on alert for the real virus. It's a newer and far faster way of making vaccines without using the virus itself.
We make this without living organisms. This is all a chemical process, nearly all of it. And so you can condense it and you can make it efficient in scale and in time relative to traditional ways of making vaccine.
Moderna is just one of several companies working on a vaccine in the United States. There are other efforts worldwide in places like Australia and France. At the Pasteur Institute in Paris, they're piggybacking on the measles vaccine, working to mix into it protection against the new coronavirus. Experts say the response from around the world has been swift.
This would be the fastest that I've seen movement from identification of a virus to generation of an approach to initial synthesis of a vaccine.
This is the third dangerous coronavirus to cause a surprise outbreak in 20 years, after two others named SARS and MERS. Experts say they don't believe it will be the last.
The ability to use this particular vaccine against other coronaviruses is something that will definitely be tested, because the goal, of course, is to have one on the shelf that you could use against the next virus that might emerge, as well as the one that we're currently dealing with.
For now, officials are trying to stop the virus's spread by isolating the sick, and doctors are looking for experimental treatments. Kathy Young, Associated Press.
China's envoy to Ottawa offered praise for Canada's help in combating the outbreak of the novel coronavirus. Ambassador Chung Pei-woo suggested that might prove useful in repairing the diplomatic rift between their countries. The ambassador was referring to the divide since the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou by Canada and China's imprisonment of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig.
Anything that your side have done and will be doing in the next few weeks in our fight against the disease, of course, that's much appreciated, and that's good. And still, we would like to see, your side also, take measures, to address the outstanding issue, in the relationship. So that will be welcome if you take the concrete steps.
Federal Transport Minister Marc Garneau is imposing a 30-day speed restriction on trains carrying dangerous goods. The measure follows the derailment of a train near Guernsey, Saskatchewan, the second derailment there in the past couple of months.
About 30 tanker cars derailed, and about 20 of them caught fire. And this is quite similar to the one that occurred about 4 miles away from there 2 months ago. I'm very concerned with the derailment of trains that are carrying dangerous goods, and I have therefore decided to put in place, for safety purposes, a ministerial order which will come into effect tomorrow night at midnight, although we are asking the railways to implement it immediately. And this will be a speed reduction for trains that are carrying significant amounts of dangerous goods. That's 20 or more cars. And that speed restriction will require them to go at no more than 25 miles an hour across the country, except there's a limitation of 20 miles per hour in built-up metropolitan areas.
Federal Conservatives are demanding that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologize for suggesting police cannot seize firearms or suspend gun licenses from those who pose a threat to themselves or others. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair says police can only act in limited circumstances.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister said law enforcement officers cannot seize gun licenses. He is wrong. An RPAL or PAL is invalidated when it's seized by police for public safety, and that person has no ability at law to possess or acquire any firearm. Will the Prime Minister now admit that Canada has long had legal options to seize firearms in public safety scenarios and apologize for misleading this House yesterday?
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. Red flag laws save lives. I've actually used those sections of the criminal code to seize firearms in these dangerous situations. And I can also advise you, Mr. Speaker, of the limitations of those laws. Mr. Speaker, we know that the average assaulted woman in Canada is assaulted 25 times in a domestic relationship before the police are in fact called. 70% of firearm deaths in this country are suicides. And we know that there are people exploiting violence and hatred against visible minorities.
In Miami, Florida, wildlife inspectors there seized around 1,400 pounds worth of shark fins from a port. Officials estimated the total commercial value of the bust is estimated between $700,000 and $1 million US.
The shipment originated in South America, and it was in transit through the United States on its way to a final destination.
Studies will tell you that there is no scientific evidence that shark fin soup has any medicinal purposes or benefits to humans whatsoever.
An estimated 1 million sharks are killed every year for their fins. Shark populations have decreased by up to 90% in some species in just the last 15 years. Fins are cut off while the animal is still alive, and the dismembered body is discarded overboard. The shark sinks to the bottom of the ocean and slowly suffocates.
There are some thrilling movies playing at the mill this weekend, including Underwater. With more, here's the owner of the mill, Len Binning, with another Movie Mill Minute.
Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan star in the amazing true story, Just Mercy. It focuses around a young lawyer who, upon graduation, embarks upon a path to defend those who have been wrongfully convicted.
If we can look at ourselves closely, we can change this world for the better. We all need grace. We all need mercy.
Kristen Stewart stars in the adventure film Underwater. Disaster strikes when an earthquake hits 6 miles under the ocean, and now they need to escape. Well, this weekend the Oscars go, and at the Movie Mill we have 3 Best Pictures currently playing. Ford vs. Ferrari, The Amazing Jojo Rabbit, and Parasite, my personal favorite.
Not a bad day for February. Sunshine, we almost hit 0. But if you like more of the white stuff, it's on the way. Must be a good weekend to hit the slopes as well. The BCN Ski Report, along with a complete look at the weather forecast, are coming up. We had lots of sunshine again today, but slightly cooler, and there's a chance of flurries developing. Jeanette Roche is here now with a bigger look at the weather picture. Jeanette?
Yeah, we are actually having some snow beginning this evening. A 30% chance of flurries, could see up to 2 centimeters tonight. The overnight low -3. It could feel like -9 though with that wind chill. And into tomorrow, also a chance of flurries. We could see 5 to 10 centimeters with a high of -3 tomorrow. Looking into the 5-day forecast, lots of sunshine for Sunday, high of 1 degree, high of 0 for Monday, and then into Tuesday, although we're going to see it climb to 4 degrees, there's going to be rain turning to freezing rain, turning to snow. The temperature's then going to drop on Wednesday to -4 and then drop even further for Thursday into the -11 degree range. The average highs and lows, 0 being the average high, -12 the average low. We are somewhat staying in that range. 19 degrees is the high temperature, and that was in 1954. On this day back in 1994, they recorded a freezing temperature of -34. The sun rose this morning at 7:56 a.m. and it set at 5:35 p.m. Okay, so looking across the nation into tomorrow's highs, we saw a lot of weather alerts earlier today. Much of that has ended, thankfully. Victoria and Vancouver highs tomorrow, 8 degrees. A high of -2 is expected up in Edmonton and -3 in Calgary. We're going to be seeing a chance of flurries across Alberta. Same thing over here for Saskatoon. Highs -6 in both Regina and Saskatoon. Mix of scattered clouds there. Winnipeg is going to drop it to -13 tomorrow as well. They're going to see a lot of sunshine with some scattered clouds there too. Now, Toronto and Ottawa are going to see a lot of sunshine tomorrow. -8 is the high in Toronto, -13 in Ottawa. Same thing for Montreal. Now, Ottawa and Montreal had heavy snowfall earlier today. That has ended, thankfully for them. Same thing over on the East Coast. There was a lot of wind warnings and heavy rains in effect for the East Coast. Now, Charlottetown is going to be seeing that heavy rain dissipating to drizzle overnight and then turning into snow, -7, -4 in Halifax, 3 degrees in St. John's tomorrow, and -7 is the high expected over in Fredericton with a mix of sun and cloud. There you go. That is your forecast.
Here's the BCN Ski Report. No new fresh snow at Marmot Basin, but they do have a 135 centimeter base. 2 new centimeters of the white stuff at Castle Mountain with a 208 centimeter base. Sunshine Village has had 7 centimeters of new with a 165 centimeter base. Lake Louise has had 2 centimeters of fresh powder with a 160 centimeter base. Mount Norquay has had 3 centimeters of fresh powder and a 91 centimeter base. 1 new centimeter of fresh snow in Akiska and a 106 centimeter base. No new snow at Whistler, but they do have a 248 centimeter base. Panorama's had 3 centimeters of fresh snow and a 127 centimeter base. Whitefish, 6 centimeters of fresh powder and a 305 centimeter base. The estimated cost to complete the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion has ballooned from $7.4 to $12.6 billion. The company made the announcement in a release earlier today. The new figure includes $8.4 billion in construction costs and an additional $1.7 billion in financial carrying costs. The company is also recommending a $600 million contingency fund for any cost overruns. The company says the number of Indigenous groups to sign deals in relation to the TMX pipeline has increased from 43 in 2017 to 58 this year. The agreements are worth $500 million. The project is supposed to be completed by 2022. More than 2,900 workers are currently working on the project, with another 2,600 to come on board later this year. Ottawa purchased the Trans Mountain Pipeline from Kinder Morgan in 2018 for $4.5 billion. A BC Supreme Court judge has rejected a request for an injunction against Uber and Lyft pending a legal review. The judge says the Vancouver Taxi Association failed to provide evidence that it will be harmed by ride-hailing services. An association spokesperson says that's not the case.
Certainly we are going in for the judicial review. And, you know, there's a lot of families and, you know, children and that rely and are dependent on this taxi industry, not just in Vancouver, but in British Columbia. You know, we're not just standing here saying no to Uber and no to Lyft. We're not saying that. We're saying bring it on fairly. Just bring it on equal for us so that we stand a chance.
Vaping, it's something which has been around for a few years now. What do we really know about the long-term effects of the practice? The U.S. government is enforcing restrictions on flavored electronic cigarettes aimed at curbing underage vaping. Some teenagers, however, may be one step ahead of the game using disposables.
When Juul pulled out their mango, creme brulee, and fruit, that people noticed, oh, there's disposable pens that actually has multiple flavor. So I had people switching from the Juul for the disposables.
Disposable e-cigarettes are attractive to youth because they cost less, can be easily hidden, and have an enticing range of flavors.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 102 points today to 17,655. The Dow was down 277 points to 29,102. The S&P 500 was down 18 points to 3327. The Nasdaq was down 51 points to 95.20. Oil was down 48 cents to $50.47 per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to $1.85. Gold was up $3.60 to $15.70.25 an ounce, and silver was down 12 cents to $17.70 an ounce. Wheat is at $228 per metric ton, barley's at $229, canola's at $4.50, and corn is at $269 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 20 cents to $121.48. Feeder cattle were down 70 cents to $137.70. Lean hogs were down 60 cents to $57.80. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.15 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge saw its first homicide of the year yesterday. Police were called out to a home on University Drive West where they found a 35-year-old man who had been shot. They say the victim and the shooter knew each other. The search for the suspect continues. David Stephan is a man who spent his entire life savings trying to prove that he and his wife were not negligent in the death of their son Ezekiel. He was found not guilty, but the Crown has appealed, and now the Stephans are headed back to court in June to answer to those charges of failing to provide the necessaries of life for their son, who died in 2012. Hear that exclusive and powerful interview with David Stephan next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Kinsman Club of Lethbridge invites you to their 6th annual Mardi Gras Charity Gala on Saturday, March 14th at the Sandman Signature Lethbridge Lodge. The evening begins at 5 p.m., where you can enjoy the ambiance of the French Quarter, which will also feature a 5-course Cajun meal, games and entertainment, a silent auction, dance, and much more. Early bird tickets are $72 and can be purchased at eventbrite.ca. Proceeds to go towards the Ready, Set, Go Back to School Fair. For details, visit the Kinsman Club of Lethbridge's Facebook page. Southern Alberta Men's Ministry is hosting Shine Be the Light Men's Conference on March 20th and 21st at University Drive Alliance Church. emceeing the conference is our very own BCN's Hal Roberts, with special guest speaker Pastor Leonard Anderson of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Tickets are $20, $10 for college students. Price includes food, fun, and fellowship. Purchase yours by visiting eventbrite.ca. For more information, call 403-327-4422. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Many of you will remember the controversial court decision from the spring of 2016 in which David and Colette Stephan from Southern Alberta were found guilty of not providing the necessaries of life for their 19-month-old son Ezekiel. Now, he died from what the Crown alleged was bacterial meningitis. They appealed but lost that court case, but later the Supreme Court of Canada granted them a retrial, which they won last summer. But hey, the Crown has appealed that. Joining me now from northwestern Alberta is David Stephan via Skype. David, thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me on, Hal.
Now, how did you feel after finally winning the last court case?
It was really great to finally have that chapter of our life kind of come to a close, or at least we thought. So, we realized that we had gotten enough of the evidence to bring forth the truth, and that the judge made the appropriate decision based on what was presented to him. And so we were really, really happy for that.
Now, on the other hand, how do you feel about learning that the Crown has decided to appeal, which means you have to go through the whole process yet again?
Well, we weren't really overly surprised when the Crown appealed. In fact, we would have been surprised had they not appealed. And the reason for that is the case law that was established to this last case was very good for parental rights in ensuring that the Crown couldn't bring erroneous charges against parents just for the sake that they have a preference of natural medicine over allopathic medicine. Um, and so it was a beautiful thing for parents and for natural medicine, or not but medicine choice or medical choice here in Canada. And so what the Crown now has to prove is that medical attention would actually make a difference in order to establish it as a necessary of life. And so that was a really beautiful thing, rather than saying, well, you didn't take your child to the doctor. We feel you should have taken your child to a doctor sooner, even though there's no evidence that it could help. Um, Now you're a criminal for doing that. And so now they have to prove that. So that's a very beautiful thing. And so we're not surprised, but we're ready to move forward.
Now, the original medical examiner found that Ezekiel died of bacterial meningitis, but Judge Claxon sided with the defense expert, the former chief medical examiner of Alberta, who said the cause of death was actually a lack of oxygen. So judges are not medical experts, David, but they do have to make a judgment. Why do you think the judge agreed with your defense expert?
There's a number of reasons. One, there was no scientific basis to say that Ezekiel had bacterial meningitis. So what the judge did conclude is that based on all the scientific evidence that was put forward to him, the meningitis that Ezekiel had at autopsy was viral in nature, which there's not a whole lot of treatments that you can do for that. Second to that, he says that it wasn't even the meningitis that Ezekiel had that caused Ezekiel to stop breathing. It had not been well established enough in the brain to even cause any damage. And so we hypothesized that actually Ezekiel likely contracted that meningitis while in hospital because he didn't have the symptoms of it previous to hospital, as well as he was on a steroid treatment that compromised his immune system for the entirety of his stay in the hospital. So it's more likely that that took place. And that came out as evidence in the court that both medical examiners testified to that being possible, that he contracted the meningitis during his hospital stay. And so we still don't know exactly why Ezekiel stopped breathing. But there was evidence presented to the judge that said it was likely due to an obstruction of the airway, hypothesis being croup, could have been something else, and that had he been able to be intubated, had Ezekiel had available to him the proper equipment necessary for him in that moment in an ambulance, he would have most likely lived. And that was the evidence that was brought forward to the judge, and there was actually scientific evidence to substantiate it. And so he went with what would have been most probable based on the legitimacy of the evidence that was presented to him.
Now, the Crown says the judge erred by insisting prosecutors had to prove taking Ezekiel to the doctor would have saved his life. Now, the Crown also pointed out in his decision that the judge noted that the Nigerian-born medical examiner spoke with a strong accent that was hard to understand. This, they argue, indicates a reasonable apprehension of bias. Your thoughts?
Yeah, not the case at all. The reason why the judge made those comments is it was his duty to do so because we had brought that up as the defense as one of the issues in regard to the weight of the evidence, or even the doctor being qualified as a medical expert, being that we couldn't understand largely a lot of what he was saying. The madam transcript was having a problem figuring out what he was trying to say when she was doing all the typing. It was a really hard. It was hard to comprehend any of the evidence that he was bringing forward, and so we brought that forward as one of our arguments. And so when the judge made those comments, it was purely in response to our arguments about him even being qualified as an expert. So he didn't go out of his way to make these comments. He was merely addressing our comments, and yet he still qualified Dr. Adiagbo as a medical expert in his field and said that the lack of being able to understand him merely goes to the weight of evidence, because if you can't understand the evidence, there's nothing you can do with it, right? And so that's what he did.
Will the Crown still need to prove taking Ezekiel to the doctor would have in fact saved his life?
That would be a good thing, if they have to prove that, because in fact, it would be illogical to not have to establish something as being necessary, as in it would make a difference, in order to convict somebody of failing to provide a necessary of life. So if a clear-cut case, if somebody dies from dehydration, if a child dies from dehydration, and it's obvious they were under the care of a guardian or a parent, then of course that parent could be charged for failing to provide necessary of life. That's just a given that water being deprived from a child is going to cause dehydration to the point of death. And so what the Crown has to do is prove that the medical attention that they claim would have changed the outcome, though they can't prove that it would have changed the outcome at all. That in order to convict us as parents, they have to say that one, we were well aware of a situation that was endangering his life, and that it was foreseeable that if we didn't do anything about it, that he would have died. And two, that by doing something about it, taking him in to a doctor, that would have actually made a difference, right? Because if it wouldn't have made any difference, then at the end of the day, how can you convict a parent for taking actions that they thought was in the best interest of their child, that wouldn't have made a difference whether they chose the left or the right?
David, do you feel that the Crown is potentially wanting to make you and your family an example?
Absolutely. This is a very peculiar case. These charges have always been reserved for cases of negligence. In a number of the hearings back in 2016, the judge identified this was clearly not a case of negligence, and that it was actually a peculiar case because of that. Once again, in this spring, back in March, the judge, Justice Rook, Associate Chief Justice Rook, second top judge in Alberta, identified as well that this is not a case of negligence, but rather a choice of care case that brings us to the courts. And so when we take a look at it, it's one, the first case of its kind in Canada, though a lot of the larger media outlets have used it to make it look like we're negligent. That's not the evidence that's before the courts. And so they're definitely using this as an example, for I'm sure a number of reasons, because we've got about a 20-year history fighting legislation and all that here in Canada. And so they would stand to benefit from that, being that we beat them in the courts back in 2005 against Health Canada, making sure that natural health freedom was established here in Canada. But further to that, they're starting to move forward. This is the first case of its kind, but there's more cases that have begun to come forward wherein it seems to be an attack on parental rights, parents that don't quite fit the mold. So if they're having home births, if they're doing their homeschooling, if they have more of an alternative lifestyle, different diet, religion seems to be a common factor amongst the parents that they're targeting. And so they seem to be profiling parents. And so there seems to be no doubt that our case, one, is a precedent-setting case, but they need it to kind of move forward to be able to convict other parents on similar things as well.
Let's talk about the hole that Ezekiel's death has left in your life. How are you, Colette, and your family coping right now?
As you can imagine, it's been extremely tough. There's no doubt about that. We were left with an absolute emptiness. He has one older sibling, and so at the time that Ezekiel passed away, we were left with our 4-year-old son, Ezra. And it's absolutely just shell-shocked all of us. We were left with this devastating silence in the home that used to be filled with children's laughter, and you'd hear toys and all that. And so it's always really plagued us. Whenever we go out for a family event, there's always that hole that there's somebody missing. And we'll never get that back. Even at one point, we considered adoption to try to fill that void. And that didn't take place, obviously, because they charged us shortly after that, and there was probably no way that we would have ever been approved for adoption. And so it's just one of those things that I guess you learn to cope with. I guess you never fully heal from it, And so yeah, it's been hard on our family, but it's definitely drawn us closer to our Creator, our God. Absolutely.
How about the financial burden as well, David? You guys must have taken quite a financial hit as well, especially with court case after court case after court case.
No, I normally don't focus on that. There's a reason why I self-represented this last trial, just because of the fact that we couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. We did end up getting half-price lawyers for Colette that could just kind of pitch in as time dictated, as their schedules would allow. And that was one half price, and two, they weren't even preparing really for court. They didn't spend the months in advance preparing, so it was really a budget court case that we just ran. But it's I haven't even done a proper accounting of it recently, but it's at least $1.2 million at this point that it's burdened us over the last 7 years. And so it's definitely changed our lifestyle substantively. We've had to sell a lot of stuff. Our standard of living obviously has changed. Our day-to-day activities have changed. Family vacations have changed. Everything's changed, right? So yeah, it's definitely had a devastating effect that way. But in the grand scheme of things, the financial burden is but a drop in the bucket compared to the emotional burden that it's placed on our family.
Now, do you know when the appeal will take place?
The appeal will take place on June 11th. Interestingly, on my birthday. So
That's my
a
birthday
day
as
that I
well,
won't.
June 11th. Wow.
Well, there we go. We can all hopefully we all have something to celebrate on June 11th beyond just our birthdays. So, which is interesting because that'll be 3 years in a row that the Crown has ensured that something's been scheduled on my birthday, which seems to be an interesting tactic that they take to try to, maybe put a little more salt in a wound. But I'm not really a big fan of birthdays anyway, so it doesn't really wear on me that way. But
Now, you believe that Alberta Health Services should also be held responsible. Can you explain?
absolutely. What's come out in the preliminary trial in 2014, in the trial proper in 2016, and then once again in trial proper 2019, it was clear evidence that Alberta Health Services was made aware that the ambulances in the Southern District were not properly equipped. They were made aware of that for about a year prior to Ezekiel needing that equipment. And they did nothing about it. The paramedics were the ones requesting that equipment, and Alberta Health Services refused to honor those requests. And so Ezekiel gets into an ambulance and he goes anywhere from 8.5 to 12 minutes without oxygen. 1 week later, after this incident, Alberta Health Services finally honors those requests and actually puts the proper equipment in those ambulances. And so, what that in essence constitutes is criminal negligence. The fact that they were made aware of a situation that was endangering lives and they did nothing about it. And then ultimately, with the judge's ruling, it just substantiates that it was criminal negligence resulting in death, being that it was hypoxic injury due to oxygen deprivation within that ambulance that caused Ezekiel's death. And so that's a very serious charge here in Canada, up to 25 years. And so it's just really ironic that the Crown, having this information made available to them, supposed to be seeking justice to deter people from engaging in criminal acts, are not laying charges against anybody in Alberta Health Services. It's just really interesting.
David, media coverage placed much of the focus on asking questions like, why were these parents treating their child, Ezekiel, using fruit juice and garlic instead of taking him to see the doctor? How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, from a parent's perspective, there was nothing alarming about Ezekiel's condition that would have warranted taking him into a doctor. He wasn't displaying signs of pain. He wasn't crying. There was nothing going on that tugs at your heart, right? That says, well, it's beyond our control now. So there was not. So the contrast of treating him versus taking him into a doctor, that wasn't even really a factor. And the second thing is that where they're getting their information about treating him with fruit juice and garlic is interesting, because we would give Ezekiel and Ezra a daily smoothie, which had fruit juice and berries. and some protein and some omega fatty acids and some vitamins and minerals in there, as well as some greens. And so that was just something that they got on a daily basis, whether they were sick or not. So it's not even that we were treating him with what they're claiming we were treating him with. That's called food. That's what they get on a daily basis. In regard to the garlic, there was a tincture that we had produced and used it twice in one day on him, and that was it over the period of him being off and on sick for up to 2 weeks there. So it's taking everything largely out of context and making us look like a bunch of crazies. And I think the reason that they're largely doing that is to make it look like it's not a peculiar case, but that this is a case of negligence, which it is not, and trying to get the public behind a conviction on this case when there shouldn't be a conviction in this case at all. And really, a lot of parents would relate to us if they knew the truth on this matter. If they actually saw the evidence for what it was, they'd say, wow, that would have been us during this situation or this situation. And so I think there's a lot of misleading information coming out to try to sway the public opinion on it.
David Steffen, the father of little Ezekiel, who will be once again defending his beliefs in a court of appeal in June of 2020. David, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Hal.
Many are familiar with the Vineyard Church movement. Today's guest had the opportunity to travel and minister with the founder of Vineyard, the late John Wimber. Glenn Schroeder is the regional coordinator for Vineyard Missions USA in Mexico and Central America. Glenn also pastors Cascade Vineyard Church in Portland, Oregon. He's also the author of Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp, the wit and wisdom of John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard Church movement. Welcome to BCN, Glenn.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
And aloha, I guess you're joining us from Hawaii, right?
That is correct. We're here to celebrate our anniversary. I'm on vacation in Hawaii today.
That's beautiful. Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp. I gotta love the title of the book. That's hilarious. How did you come up with that?
I didn't come up with that. Actually, John did. Every chapter in the book is based on these little sayings that John had that were ways of communicating either theological or sort of philosophy of ministry truth. And Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp was one of those. It was something he said to indicate that leadership is a hard road, and sometimes those hard knocks really shape us and form us and make us into the people we become in the Lord.
So what was it like really traveling with John Wimber, the founder of the Vineyard Church?
Well, it's interesting because we were very young at the time, and it was kind of, at that time, it seemed normal. We were just doing what we thought we were supposed to be doing. And he had really a very strong emphasis on releasing ministry and letting other people do ministry. So there was a team of us that went along with him on a number of different trips, and it was really fun. Years later, looking back, was talking to one of my friends that was on some of those trips, and he made the statement, I wish we'd have paid more attention, because at the time it seemed very normal. We just felt like we were doing what God had called us and led us to do.
Glenn, there's a lot of talk lately about whether God uses flawed leaders to accomplish his purpose and will. What's your take on that issue?
I think we're all flawed leaders. And I think that we have a couple of options. One is to allow those things to disqualify us and take us out of the game, or to allow those things to strengthen us and make us stronger and better leaders.
Now, recent studies show that Christians are not sharing their faith enough and that the number of unchurched people is actually growing. What do you make of these kinds of trends?
It's an interesting trend. I was talking to somebody recently about not only that trend in general, but that trend specifically among young people today, the millennial generation. We found that in our church in specific and in the Vineyard movement as a whole, that it's very attractive to young people if we have a very authentic style of faith that's not critical, judgmental, but embracing, welcoming, and like I said, authentic.
Now, can you share the story of how John Wimber, the leader of the Vineyard movement, came to know Christ?
I can. John was a musician, a professional musician, who worked with a band called the Paramours, who later became the Righteous Brothers. And he was, his wife and a group of people, that friends of his in Yorba Linda, California, were attending a small Bible study after their church service. And John was touring and traveling at the time, not part of the group. And he showed up at the group one night. And then there's a gentleman there named Gunnar Payne, who was an oil field worker completely different reality, different background than John, and just began to share his faith very, again, authentically. And so John came to Christ.
Now, John Wimber's book, Power Evangelism, changed the way American evangelicals pray, gather, and really reach out. Why do you think it was so influential?
I think it was influential because it incorporated everybody into the game. An evangelist was no longer a person on a stage. It was no longer a big name, God's man of the hour person. It was every believer in every pew in every church in America.
You know, Glenn, I'm told that every Vineyard church has an ashtray out front of the building. Are there still that many smokers in the world? What's going on there?
You know, I've heard that, but I've not seen that. I think some may. We do not. I don't know how many smokers there are. I think, if anything, it would be an indication that you're welcome here regardless.
Now, you chatted a bit earlier about John's musical influences. You know, he was a musician. To what extent did Wimber's background in the music industry influence the way Christian worship music has changed?
I think it was significant because today worship music is, contemporary, what we know as contemporary worship is very popular. In the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s, when Vineyard was just beginning, there wasn't much like it out there. And it was really revolutionary to do worship in the style of contemporary music that Vineyard was doing at that time.
So 80s would be considered contemporary? The reason I'm asking that is my senior producer always gives me a rough time that even my worship music's from the 80s. So it's still cool. Is it still okay?
It was contemporary then. If we play 80s today, we're outdated.
Now, you write about some of the so-called Wimberisms. What are they exactly?
Wimberisms, again, were these little statements that John would use to describe either theological truth or philosophy of ministry. Things like the meats in the street. And that came from a conversation he had. A woman came up to him following a service and said, "Hey, when are we going to get into the meat of the word?" And John said, "Well, the meat's in the street," meaning that the meat of the word is when you do the word. And so there are any number of sayings, and I've taken the time to write as many as I could remember down in my book and write a little bit about each one.
Glenn, tell me more about the term "everyone gets to play."
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorites. Everyone gets to play was, again, a philosophical statement that the ministry of the kingdom of God is not restricted to professionals. It's not restricted to pastors or elders. It's really a statement that says that every single believer has a valid contribution to make to the kingdom of God, and everyone can be involved in ministry.
Why do you say the pastoral ministry is not very easy, especially today?
I think it's a lot of fun, but it's a challenge because, again, what you said earlier, there's a lot of presupposition of people outside the church about what the church thinks about them. And so you have to push past some of those things and make people realize that God is a loving God and we are loving people, and we want to welcome them in and not just be critical and judgmental of them. I think when you can get past some of those barriers that have been erected over time, we really come to a place where we realize, hey, this is a valid thing to do.
So, Glenn, what did John Wimber say to you when you once opened up about your own personal struggles?
So that's a great story. Before I was on staff with John, I was a gardener in and around Orange County. John was one of my clients. And I showed up at his house one day to do the lawn. He came out to talk to me, and I was going through a tough time. I was probably about 21 or 22 years old at the time. And, he said, "How you doing?" And I kind of cried the blues a little, said, "Hey, John, I'm having kind of a hard day, a hard week, whatever." And he said, "Well, you're doing the right thing." And I said, "I am?" He said, "Yeah, you're doing the right thing." He goes, "When you feel like that, what you want to do is stay in bed and pull the covers over your head and just hide all day. But what you need to do is get up, get out, put your shoes and socks on, go to work, and pray. Pray until that lifts off of you." And I tell you, it changed everything for me. And I did exactly what he said. I was mowing the lawn and praying at the same time. By the end of the day, I think things had changed significantly for me.
That's great. Now, you write about the rabbinic model of discipleship. What does that mean?
That means that it's really a show and tell kind of model. John really believed that discipleship was transferred through life. And so it's sort of like he would invite somebody to come along with him and watch him do ministry. And then he would invite them into the process and they would minister with him. And then he would say, "Okay, now you do it." And then he would watch. And so it was really just a transference of authority, a transference of ministry through a sort of a show and tell or rabbinic model. And really, John trained I don't know, hundreds of people to do ministry in that way.
You say, Glenn, being in a grace-filled community was the way in and the way on. How so?
Yeah. So again, I think sometimes there's this idea that, especially today, okay, we talked about the current situation in the Church of America today. I have to get my life together. I have to get things straight, and then I can go to church. Then I can come to God. John's idea was, no, just come as you are. Come on in, and let's work on those things together. And so that was sort of the way in is the way on. And we were accepted and received with grace, and then we continued on in that same path. And then I think ultimately use that to welcome others in along the way.
Hey, Glenn, a lot of times your pastors say, just come as you are. Flip-flops, jeans, ripped jeans, whatever, doesn't really matter. But then there are other people, you know, more traditionalists that say, no, you should really put on your Sunday best and show respect to God when you go to church. What are your thoughts?
I understand that completely. So come as you are was a statement that John used that many people think describes just come as you are in terms of your dress. But it really was a deeper statement of come as you are in regards to the condition of your heart. Where are you at in life? And come to the Lord that way and let him work together on where that goes from here. As far as clothing, vineyard churches today tend to be very casual. And it's not necessary for us to put on our best. I think in our mind, in our heart, it's really putting your best in your heart. What's in here, putting that forward more than what's on the outside.
Okay, let's talk more, Glenn, about the core DNA that is part of the Vineyard movement.
Well, that's a big question. I think there are a number of issues. Really, my book is about the DNA of the Vineyard. Every chapter is a little bit about who we are as a people and what defines us. I've tell our congregation and those I get a chance to talk to, we're not the best church in town, we're not the only church in town, but this is who we are. And so I think part of our DNA is that authenticity, that ability to come where we are today and to move forward together with the Lord. And it's a humility that allows us to enter into a place of worship that, in my mind, is very, very genuine and very real.
Why do you think so many young people today find a home in Vineyard churches?
Well, for one thing, everything I just said, plus the fact that we make an opportunity for them to make a valid and vital contribution. You don't have to get older to be involved in a Vineyard church. I've told people my church today, my associate pastor is 27 years old. There's only one person on my worship team over the age of 30, and one of our worship leaders is 18. And so we make a place for them, and they know that their contribution counts. And that was really something that came from John. I was 19 when I started attending the Vineyard, and my wife was a little bit younger than me. And we really found that we were active and involved and engaged from the very beginning, regardless of how old we were.
Glenn, how can we make church more relevant in today's society?
That's a great question. I think one is opening the door to younger people. I think speaking a language that they can understand and being willing to embrace people where they are, and with a loving and an acceptance and a welcoming that's not critical or judgmental. I think there's nothing more relevant than the church in my mind to where we are as a world today. There's so much division, so much isolation, and church is community. It's not division. It's connection, and I think those things, speaking those things loud and clear, will draw people's hearts into, a relationship with the Lord.
And our young people are the leaders of tomorrow, so love them where they're at, I guess, right?
I think they're the leaders today.
What do you hope readers will really take away from reading your book?
I really hope that they take away an understanding that the Vineyard movement, John in specific, and really the kingdom of God is a place where everybody really does get to play, and where everybody can make a contribution, and where humility and authenticity are greater values than maybe some of the other values that they've had put forth in other contexts.
Glenn Schroeder, author of Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp, The Wit and Wisdom of John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard Church Movement. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Maui, Hawaii.
Thank you so much for having me on. Aloha.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.